Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rohan. Welcome to the UniAdmissions Open Day. We're just waiting on Matt to sort a couple of things out at his end and waiting for a couple more people to join, and then we'll kick off. So today's an unusual topic because it wasn't meant to be, actually it wasn't planned, but with all the changes that have been happening in the admissions processes, we've kind of put this on as an extra Open Day. I like your beard, man. I've not seen you for a while.
Thank you. It's annoying to keep up, but people seem to like it so far, and that's the important thing. I still haven't figured out how to wash it exactly. There doesn't appear to be any beard specific shampoo. It's a little bit of a mystery, that one.
Wow. Okay. Well, while we're waiting for a couple of stragglers and for you, Matt, to launch, I'm just going to launch a couple of polls just to get to know our listeners and viewers at home. So if you can just give me a better understanding of where you're applying, or if it's you or someone else, that will obviously help us focus in on what we should be targeting. And we're actually blessed in the sense that there's actually a relatively small number of you. So if you do have any questions, I'm happy to go through them right now, but also at the end. Great. Okay. So most people are voting.
You underestimate my speed, Rohan. We're all sorted out here at my end.
Oh, how could I have doubted you, Matt? Well, in that case, let's get the show on the road.
Fab. Hi, everyone. We're here to have a chat today. It'll work better if I turn the slides on, won't it? We're here to have a chat today about the importance of admissions tests and the ways in which the slight date changes that we've become aware of this week should impact your thinking. So we're going to be talking sort of very briefly about what exactly is changing, how that should impact your preparation, and we'll be talking a little bit as well about the relative importance of admissions tests, because this is something that we love to go on about. So if you've ever come to any of these before, that should hopefully be a fairly familiar theme for you, as it really is my favorite thing to talk about. You should see how bored everyone else gets with it. The change, but it simply is, that some of the admissions tests have been moved forward. That is to say, they are happening sooner rather than later. This is the case for the Bmat, most importantly, but also for the test of mathematics for university admissions, which is used by Cambridge and a group of other universities, the ENGAA, the Engineering Admissions Assessment, and the Natural Sciences Admissions Assessment, both of which are Cambridge as well. Now, as far as I've been able to tell from checking through the Cambridge Admissions Assessment's website, all of the others are sticking their traditional date, which is the first Wednesday in November. So that is, what I think, 18 days after the UCAS deadline this year. By contrast, the tests that have been moved forward are now on, is it the 19th? I think it is, Rohan, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so only 4 days after the UCAS deadline, and considering that the UCAS deadline is 6 p.m. and these tests tend to be done in the morning, they're normally a 10 a.m. start, it's more like 3 days.
Yeah, sorry, it's 18th, you're right, it is 3 days, it's 15th till the 18th.
Yeah, so really not very long at all. Now, this is not going to impact you if you're applying for every subject, as we've said. It's particularly a worry if you are applying for medicine in a lot of different places, but it's also a particular worry if you're applying for engineering, and that includes chemical engineering at Cambridge, applying for natural sciences, veterinary medicine at Cambridge, computer science at Cambridge, and also for maths at a whole range of universities, Bath, Cardiff, Durham, all sorts of places. Although we're going to be focusing principally on the Bmat here, because that is the test that is the most popular. I'm not sure I've ever really thought of Bmat as being popular, but certainly the most widely taken of this set.
Yeah.
So what this means for you is, the short answer is 2 fewer weeks to prepare. 2 weeks is a long time when you've got a test at the end of it, because humans being what they are, they tend to put a lot more revision into the last 2 weeks than into the first 2 weeks. The sense of urgency makes that bit of planning a little bit difficult. So if you were really relying on those 2 weeks at the end to get things done, you don't have those 2 weeks. You still have the last 2 weeks, but they're going to be 2 weeks sooner. The other thing this plays off sort of in the psychology is that there is now essentially no gap between you sending in your UCAS form and you doing the test. So if I ping up my calendar, just sort of get the timings of this right, what will happen is that you will be sending in your UCAS statement on Saturday night. The deadline is 6 p.m. After having panickedly chased up your school for your reference on Thursday and Friday. I feel very bad for all those A-level teachers who are going to be writing a lot of references that Saturday. So you're going to send that off Saturday morning, have a nice rest on Saturday, Sunday, and all of a sudden you've got that test coming up on Tuesday. Now that is virtually no gap at all. And the problem is that the way our minds work is we tend to think about the things one at a time. And it can be very difficult, particularly when there's something big and important, like finishing the form and the personal statement. It can be very difficult to think about the thing that happens after that as being entirely real. And so what will tend to happen is you'll say, okay, well, I'll get my personal statement done and then I'll revise for the test. And the problem with that is if you don't get your personal statement done until 2 days before the deadline, you've only got 5 days, which isn't long enough to revise for the test.
And you know
what this means.
The other thing.
Sorry, carry on, Rohan.
No, I was just wondering. The other thing I'm just kind of, some parents don't seem to realize this, but last year, if your test was taking place in early November or late October, people had the gift of a full week of study because they were pretty much on half term, or in some schools were even 2 weeks in half term. So basically, you lost. I mean, we're saying you've lost 2 weeks of revision. Essentially, it's probably closer to a month, if not more, because people would really cram in a lot. If you look at the stats from our portal, we see a huge spike in the half-term week when students are preparing. So they basically just lost that entire week of preparation.
Yeah. What this means, however, is we're talking, here, Rohan and I, about students who are not as smart, not as well organised as yourselves. Those students are going to be in trouble because they are not going to have time to revise properly. Whereas you, smart people who are here planning ahead by almost exactly 3 months, you are going to have planned for this, you'll be prepared. And because of that group of students who are not going to be prepared, you are really well placed this year because the reward for that extra revision, for that extra planning is going to be even bigger than usual because there are going to be so many more students who haven't realised they need to do it. This is particularly important in the context of the admissions tests, because as we talk about every week, over the past couple of years, because of the pandemic and the way the centre assessed grades process has worked, the share of students getting really good GCSE scores, getting really good A-level scores has really jumped. And while this doesn't mean that the results got in these exams are any less valid, it does mean that for the purposes of the universities who are trying to figure out which students are the most capable, these grades have become less and less useful because if everyone's getting, if a much larger share of your applicants than previously are getting straight A's, it's very difficult to tell which of those students are better and worse than one another because the information you've been given doesn't include that sense of variation. Now, it's always been the case to an extent because of students applying from outside the UK. So it's never been entirely true that the admissions test is the thing you're being assessed on. But now, for even including UK students, it's going to be the one thing that every applicant has done on the same day, the same set of questions. It becomes really important because it's the only objective metric for comparing applicants that they're going to have to work with. We tend to think of this in the form of a pie chart. Rohan, tell us about the pie chart.
Thanks, Matt. So historically, you would have seen a slightly different pie chart, but this is the updated one following COVID. And what we've done is essentially we've analysed the admissions scores and the admissions algorithms across a number of courses at both Oxford and Cambridge and come to this. Now, obviously, certain courses will have slightly different weightings, but very broadly, how it breaks down to is that your GCSE grades and your A-level predictions make up about 10% of your admission score. And then the other 40% is made up of the admissions test. A further 40% is the interview, which is the yellow segment. And then everything else that students tend to worry about, things like school references, extracurriculars, personal statement, all of that makes up that final grade 10% segment. So you can see that 80% of the application is still to go, which is the interview and the admissions test. Now, students will historically over-prepare on the grey segment and they'll under-prepare on the 80%. And that's what bad students. Good students will do the exact, essentially prepare in proportion. And what it does mean is, as the dates are brought forward, is we're recommending students complete their application by the latest, by the 15th of September. So you do it a month before the UCAS deadline, and then you go hard at it for at least 4 full weeks.
Yeah, as Rohan says, the scary thing about the pie chart can be the sense that you aren't getting as much credit perhaps for your GCSEs as you would like, but the real upside to it is that you still have so much control over the fate of your application, even at this stage. You could be picking up that offer from Oxford or Cambridge in barely 6 months from now, but in those 6 months you control 80–90% of your destiny, which is enough to be decisive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a good thing the GCSEs matter less, because 3 or 4 years ago, when I used to speak to parents and students, the modal grade was probably, most people had generally half A stars or 8s and 9s. But now the modal grade is pretty much, if you don't have straight 9s, you're actually, from purely anecdotally, having spoken to about 50, 100 parents this year, you're actually below average, which is crazy compared to a few years ago. So it would just be penalizing very bright students if they were to over-index on the GCSEs like they used to.
Yeah, and as much as anything else, the GCSEs, that was quite a long time ago.
Yeah.
If you're a 17-year-old, 2 years is a dreadfully long time. And so it wasn't fair to judge you based on what you did when you were almost 16, when you were almost 18, because a great deal will hopefully have changed in that time. So to think a little bit more about the subjects we're looking at, the admissions test, we've talked about how important it is in terms of getting those places, and that's in part because the subjects we're looking at here are really competitive. Only around 15% of students applying for engineering, just under a quarter of those applying for veterinary medicine, a similar number for those applying for natural sciences get offers from Cambridge, and the offer rate for computer science is absolutely tiny. And it's been going down really precipitously over the past several years. When I applied to university 1,000 years ago, people were getting into computer science at much more reasonable rates, and that's now dropped to, I believe it was close to 9% last year, and now all the way down to 7.4. So we're really talking about huge numbers of people going after a very small number of places when it comes to computer science. So your performance in that test is going to make a huge difference to your chance of getting an interview and getting that offer. Just to sort of drive that point home, I wanted to show a few slides about the strength of that correlation before Rohan comes on to talk a little bit about the support we offer as an organisation. I think we've covered all of this. Yes. The last thing to say here is that the tests are this year a mix of computer-based and paper. Some of them, such as I think the TSA is still on the computer. The Bmat is back on paper, which I think we're all delighted about.
Okay.
The great thing about paper is it doesn't fail to load.
Yeah. Unlike the last 2 years, which sounds silly, but important.
Yeah, you don't have to sit there writing F5 on the piece of paper again and again until it starts working. A huge relief that these are back on paper. Do check that your exam, whether it's on paper or on computer, it may sound like a trivial difference, but it makes an important difference to the way, in our experience, that you should approach the test. And as much as anything else, the way to perform to your best in these tests is for everything that happens to be boring and unsurprising. And so discovering that something is on paper rather than on computer rather than on paper, will really put you off and throw you. And these exams tend to be quite pressured. That means they can be quite emotional as experiences. And so it's really important to know what you're going in for. Speaking of sort of time pressure and the importance of sort of management there, if we look at the distribution of scores for the Bmat last year, year before last, this is because this is the last This is the last pre-pandemic year, so the last year it was still on paper. You'll see that the gap between students as they get individual marks up, and we're looking at section 1 here, can be really small. So each of these columns corresponds to a correct answer in one of the 32 Bmat questions in section 1. So over here at 9, we've got 32 out of 32, and down there at 1, we've got someone who, I guess, decided the test wasn't for them. What you'll notice is that even getting 1 or 2 extra correct answers, so taking yourself from the 4.5 region here, where we're looking at the average person applying, just 2 extra correct answers is the difference between them and an average applicant to a really top university like UCL, and a further 3 correct answers, the difference between someone who's applied to UCL and someone who gets that offer. Because these margins are so small, you know, each correct answer, you're overtaking, I'm trying to think, something of the order of very close to 1,000 other applicants. You're making an enormous difference to your chances with each additional correct answer. You know, you get yourself from being barely above average to in the top quarter, the top 20% in only 4 or 5 correct answers. And if you're, you know, if you're well prepared for the exam, if your time management is right, if you're able to give the last question as much attention as the first, which is a common mistake people make, you stand a really good chance of making that level of improvement. And this is why we put so much emphasis on these tests, because not only is the difference that you can make to your outcome with just a few extra correct answers huge, but we find also that the correlation between it and your chance of getting an offer is really strong. So if we look here at the Oxford Maths admissions tests, what you'll see is that below the median score, essentially no one is getting an offer and only a small number of people are getting an interview. As you get into the top 10, 15, 20% of the score, pretty much everyone is getting an interview and a good share of people are getting an offer. And right down at the end, you see the point where once you're in the real top scoring section there, your chance of getting an offer are pretty much 50-50 and you're guaranteed that interview. So in terms of the R squared of what we're looking at here, we see a really strong correlation between performance in the admissions tests and the outcomes, which is why we put such an emphasis on them. Because what you can do over the next few weeks, and particularly what you might have been planning to do in those 2 weeks you thought you were going to have, getting those extra 2, 3, 4 marks in the Bmat, pushing yourself up from average to really exceptional, it makes such a huge difference to your application. So it's something that we put an enormous emphasis on. As I've said, those few extra questions, you can take yourself from you know, being just above average to in the top third, and in some instances that will double your chances of getting of an admission, getting an offer, and that may only be 2 extra correct answers. These admissions tests are also the only like-for-like comparison the universities have, because of the way GCSEs and A-levels have been, because of the students applying from outside the UK. There's no other thing that you've all done the same, and so this is that one piece of absolutely objective data they have to compare all the students who they're looking at. And finally, and this is really important in the context of the UCAS deadline, it will be really tempting to spend extra time on your personal statement rather than studying for these tests. Shuffling commas around on your personal statement easier. It's much more difficult to decide that the personal statement is finished when there are so many little tweaks you can make to it. Really try and resist that. Put it away with a month to go and just switch over to that test prep, because that hour you spend revising for the test is going to be so much more valuable than anything you can do to your personal statement towards the end. So I've sort of dashed through that, but there is more to our support than these slides. Rohan, tell a little bit about the kind of support we provide.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. If you're new to the organization, then I'll go through these, but hopefully you've probably already got a good sense of what we do. The way
I do.
Well, Matt definitely does. He's heard this a while. Look, the way we work with students is we like to work with them over a long period of time. Our main entry for the full programs I'm going to be describing is in July. After that, we don't accept students onto the full programs. The way they're structured, there's 4 main pillars, and they're kind of helpfully labeled. And I always catch Matt out because he doesn't know which one I'm going to choose first. So the way it works is, firstly, you'll have one-to-one teaching. So that's essentially, we'll pair you with someone who's, let's say you're applying for economics at Cambridge, you'll have an economics tutor who's studying at Cambridge. They'll take you through the whole process from personal statement, selecting your college, your SAQ, your admissions test, the Tmua, and then finally the interview. Typically, most students will come in to about 5 to 7 tutors throughout their journey with us. So that's one element. The second element is all of our resources. So we've got lots of textbooks and materials, things like online videos, resources, work solutions to all questions, and we make all of them available to you. The third thing is we have every week, we have something called enrichment seminars. Ones this week take place tomorrow at 2 o'clock every Sunday. It's a 90-minute lecture. And the idea of these is to stretch you beyond what you're learning in your A-level specification. So that when you get to your interview, the interviews say, what have you read recently? Or what are you interested in? You can actually go above and beyond what your peers are going to be saying. And the fourth and final thing, as well done, Matt, is we have our intensive courses. So these are essentially top-up days, the idea of which is to essentially bring all of our students up to the same level and then teach them the time-saving techniques that are really going to help you stand out for your admissions test. You're probably wondering it's a lot, and it is. It typically takes about 200 hours of study between now and the end of the year, so it is a fair commitment in terms of time. But what we do does work. We get more than 2/3 of our kids in, or just under 2/3 of our kids in. And so far we've sent more than 500 kids to Oxbridge. So what we do does work, but it does require your time as well. We don't accept every student. You do have to be keen, committed. That's why if you're interested, please go to our website and then you can book a consultation with one of our consultants. I'm actually taking a few this evening, so you may even end up speaking to me. And this little graphic here shows you how to actually book a consultation. The main thing to stress here is we are not a tutoring company. If you're looking for just a cheap tutor, I can obviously recommend a few companies, or a quick Google will bring up a few cheap tutoring companies. We're a specialist Oxford prep school, and therefore we get results, and that's why we do things that way. So if you're interested, obviously book that in. And now it's the fun part, which is the questions. So if you have any obscure questions that you want to try and catch me and Matt out, then we're very happy to take them. On the caveat that Matt and I can only open about 3 or 4 spreadsheets at the same time, so it may work better if you book a consult.
Yes, as Ryan said, we have tried other things. We have in the past tried a model that has more tuition, that has less resource built into it. The enrichment seminars is something we introduced, I think, about 18 months ago. And we make a real effort to make sure that the things we recommend are based on the data we have available, because we want to make sure that what we do works, because there's nothing more frustrating than studying for something that doesn't turn out to be on the test, so to speak. So we do make sure that all the things we recommend are tied up into the outcomes as well, which makes for some interesting graphs, which keep me busy. So Rohan said, please drop in any questions you have for us, and we will sort of go from there. So Ben asks about what constitutes a good score in the Tmua. He's seen conflicting information online.
We don't know, do we? Is I think the fair comment here, because it's the first year that's going to be used for a lot of Cambridge subjects. Is the nuts and bolts. Historically, all of these tests are scored on a scale of 0 to 9. Typically, they're configured so that, and again, it depends on the test, but typically they're configured so that 5 is average, 6 is good, and 7 is excellent. If you're kind of in that excellent region, you're pretty much guaranteed an interview, is the way they've historically used them.
But of course, the difficulty with that is saying that you've done, getting a good score isn't always the most helpful thing, because these tend to be scaled. I'm having a look in my big spreadsheet. So if you want to vamp for a little bit, I will. I should have something in a minute or two.
The other thing to mention is Cambridge are quite generous, so they do interview the vast majority of applicants for most of their courses. In fact, the college I applied to, they interviewed everyone who applied to medicine, for instance, and economics. So it really depends on on what you're looking for. But if you're asking what impact Tmua will have on your interview, very little. They'll probably interview you anyway. If you're asking what score do I need, well, that really depends on other factors in your interviews and stuff. But I'll leave that to Matt. I'm going to move on to Adam Darvish, and we'll circle back to you, Ben. So Adam asks, what age are the enrichment seminars for? So the whole programs are intended for students applying for 2023 entry. So that means if you're applying now and hoping to go to university next year, if you're in year 10 or 11 going into year 11 or 12, then we have something called the Head Start program, which is intended to essentially, well, like the name suggests, allow you to get a head start on the competition. And we have separate seminar streams that run for those, and those are intended for, well, students currently just finishing years 10 and 11.
Right. So I've managed to get a lovely graph.
Oh, quick.
So I'm not going to go into the maths of it because it's really fiddly. But the Tmua is scaled such that the top third of students get 6.5 and above, and students are capped off at 9. So looking at the data I've got in front of me, which I suppose we could shuffle over and share, couldn't we? That would be nice. What we can see that the distribution follows a fairly similar shape to the Bmat distribution that we saw earlier, although it is substantially canted to the left. Now, it's always a little tricky with these because they're scale scores, but what you can see is that there is a very definite jump around the sort of 5.5 to 6 range, where we then get into sort of the elite group of students and down into that higher that top scoring third. My guess would be, without having the information lining this up with the what's it called, with the admission statistics, is that for computer science, you really need to be looking at the top 15, 20% in order to be a competitive applicant, because of the because of just the incredible rate of competition for that subject. But I would say, as a general rule of thumb, you want to be in roughly the percentile that is sort of double the admissions rate. So if you're looking at something where 10% of people get in, you want to make sure in the top 20%, and so on and so forth. That would be kind of my rule of thumb. What you can probably do is, if you line up the answer key with the with this score distribution, you can probably work out how to line up the raw score with the scale score, which is what I recommend you to do if you really want to get a detailed sense of how you're performing on the past papers. I hope that was helpful. Given longer, I can probably come up with a more fulsome answer, but that is the magic of trying to do the PowerPoint presentation and the Excel work at the same time. Rohan, there was a question from Fahim you were interested in.
Yes, will this recording? Oh wow, there's 3 questions now on whether the recordings. Clearly, people are keen to enjoy the sunshine, and so we are, Matt. Yes, recordings are shared Wednesday and Thursday, but just look out for them in an email. Wonderful. Yep. Okay. Any other questions? Otherwise, we'll start wrapping up soon.
Yes, they get uploaded later in the week. If you really enjoyed it, there is an enormous archive of them. So if you feel as though you don't have enough of my company in your life, there are, I should wager, 60, 70, 80 hours of these up there. So you can just watch hour after hour of me doing PowerPoint presentations. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone, but they are there if you would enjoy them. I think Rohan is still using them as a kind of mixed training tool and punishment inside the organization.
Wonderful. Well, look, sounds like we've satisfied everyone's curiosity for today. If you do have any more questions, then please let us know. One final one from Ben. Are the premium programs available for specific admissions tests, like the TMUA, and when would be the best time to start? Well, yes, Ben, we do work with students just on the admissions test. We like to work with them throughout the whole application because ultimately we like to get results. But we have worked with students just on their tests. Typically, most students will work with us but for at least a test and interview. The ideal points, that the 3 main entry points, January, April, and July. July probably is the largest intake. Students do join us later on throughout the year. The best results we see tend to be from students joining us earlier rather than later, but it again depends on the student as well. So the best time, like with investing, the best time to start was well, a while ago, but the next best time is now.
Yes, I believe it's Confucius. When is the best time to plant a tree? Yesterday. When is the second best time to plant a tree? Today.
Remarkable.
So I think we'll end it there.
Old school, isn't it?
Yeah, I'm not going to improve on Confucius, so I think we'll leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Rohan, and please go out and enjoy the sunshine if that's what it's like where you are. I hear the weather's dreadful if you're in Australia, so hopefully you're not there. But have a lovely weekend, everyone. Have a lovely weekend, Rohan, and we will see some, if not all of you, next week, when I will be talking about applying as an international student, which is a specific and interesting thing to talk about. So I'm looking forward to that. Have a lovely weekend, and thank you very much, Rohan and everyone else.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Matt. Always a pleasure. Have a good afternoon, everyone.